Okay, so there's like two approaches to doing a mobile site. You can do a mobile site specific for the device that you want to target. You may end up doing that for several devices because there's a lot of them out there now. Another approach that's coming on right now is the one size fits all, and that's where responsive theming comes in, where it's looking at your device and adjusting depending on the features that your device has. And a dedicated theme does have its advantages. For one, you can leave content out that you don't want your mobile users to see. Older sites don't have to be modified. A lot of sites are still out there using tables, and they just don't work with mobile. So if you want to build another theme and keep your existing site up, that's something that you can keep in mind. That's where a dedicated theme might come in handy. Now, there are some disadvantages too, because you're going to have multiple sites to maintain. You're going to have content that's going to be spread out, duplicated content that's got to be edited, both of them, depending on what gets changed. That's where the responsive theme is really, that approach is taking on, because you have one site that you maintain. There's a lot less maintenance, especially on the front end for this. And there's no need to have duplicate content because you can write one set of content and use it for all of your different devices. As I mentioned earlier, these are using primarily media queries that uses to define the styles that go to each device. Now, a media query, how many of you are programmers, like with PHP or Java? Like a SQL query, you're querying a database to get you write your joins, your whatever, to get the data that you need to put on the page. But whereas a media query, you're making a query against the device that you're looking at. In this case, like that's a projector is a media type. This is a computer screen, this is type. A mobile phone is a media type. Now, they all have different features, like this has got 1280 by 800 resolution, whereas a mobile phone, much smaller than that. So that's what the media query is doing, and it's looking primarily, and what most people are using now is just the size of the device. That's what's that's what determines what styles you're going to shoot to your page. There's several different types. Oral is like for a speech, someone that's visually impaired, they can listen to it. There's Braille, handheld, phone, obviously, print, which you want to send something to a printer. These have been around for a while. All these different have been around, and you use a style link like we have here to shoot that to your specific, like the media type. Here, it's going to go to all of them. Now you can put screen, you can put handheld, you can put projector, depending on where you want your content to go. Now the feature part, and this is where the media queries are different, but before it was just media. But with CSS3, they allowed you to have features. The features are the actual features of your device: width, height, the device width, like min or max width, the color index, all of the aspect ratio. You can use all of these. But right now, since it's still pretty early in the development, everyone's staying with width for now. They might go with an orientation for where you go with a handheld where you're either portrait or landscape, but mostly you're just going to be using width. There's 3 different ways you can use it. You can include the top one, the @media. You put that right in your style sheet, and you can put several of them in one style sheet. This is the way I prefer. The other way is @import. You can use this in a style sheet as well. There are some performance implications that you're going to have to worry about with that. The last way is here where we just had the media all before. Now we can put the and include your media feature that you're targeting. So that particular instance, it's only going to work on style sheets, on displays that have a minimum width of 960 pixels. Everything else is going to ignore that. So that's where the media features come in. You can link these together. You'll have a lot of them. Let me show you some examples here. I have a site that's really cool. You can go to it. It's called Media Queries. I don't know if you can see that. It's like it's got the Spanish top-level domain. So it's just mediaqueries.es is how it ends. But they have all these different sites that use them, and on their page they have a little snapshot of each one. We'll click on one and take a look at it. This is in the full width, and you can see that by resizing it, They have all kinds of cool parallax things going on here. Watch the layout change as it changes. So right here we're at like handheld width. About right here is where you're getting into your tablets. And your desktop, they get even wider. And there's several more. Like I say, you should go to the site and get some inspiration. Let's take a look at a couple more. Here we have like 3 columns underneath.
So they're using percentages, or or is it just that 960?
Well,
Whatever that is, that JavaScript.
this is, I would think they're using percentages. That's a good point though, because when I started coding, back in the mid-90s, you only had screens you had to worry about, and everybody used tables, and you never had to worry about a width because it just filled up your screen, but you weren't using wide aspect ratio displays then. Like right now, you have 1920 by 1080, 1080p. If you put that wide, the lines of text are going to be really wide and they're going to be really hard to read. It brings me back. Here's a site that I used to read, Slashdot. They're kind of stuck in there. You can see that they are responsive. Their center column resizes depending. But this is not anything new. This is the way things were written back in the day. But once we started to see these wide aspect ratio displays, people started getting away from that and they started going with a fixed width, and then the number that came up the most was 960 just because of all the multipliers that go into 960. And it's half of 1920, so you can get 2 pages on one screen. But that was before phones came out. So if you want to take a look at what that would look like, if you have a mobile phone, log into level 10 guest. Level 10's the password, and that IP number has got a little site that I'm running on this computer right now that you can take a look at. Let me pull that up. And this is just the way it's, well, let's refresh this.
I mean, this is a lot like Fluid Design back in the
Exactly.
90s,
It's,
early 2000s, kind of on steroids.
yeah, it's just like Fluid, because people got away from Fluid when they got these wide aspect ratios, but displays. But now that there's, now that we have all these other devices, they're going back to that. Let's see if I can get this to work. Okay. Now this is pretty much the way the site looks. It's just a fake company I made, Awesome Widgets. It's got 3 columns. It's 980 pixels wide. The sidebars are 25% of the width, and the middle column is 50%. So that's pretty basic. Now, if you look at that on a phone, and I have a couple right here as it turns out. You can't read it because it's going to come in the full size, and you have to zoom in on specific parts of it so you can actually read it. Now with a mobile design, you can actually get rid of those columns because the sidebars aren't really helping you read that. Also the fixed width is not either. But you have the iPad. Could you get in on that? Get to level 10 guest?
Sure.
You'll need to be the level 10 as the password, and then use that IP number. But let's go ahead and make this responsive. And I got a pretty easy way to do that. Okay, now it's responsive. You notice it's a little bit wider than it was because I want it to be responsive so I can use more of that space, make those columns a little bit wider. But as it gets smaller, depending on the size, I've got the sidebar set as a percentage of the screen, and when it gets to a certain point, the sidebars get too small. Like right here, they're getting pretty thin. But I got a break point here where the sidebar is actually, there's only going to be 1 now. And it's 33% of the width instead of 25, but I put all of all of the sidebar blocks go into the one column, whereas you go over here, I got half over here and half over here, but I can actually, by using a media query, I can change the CSS to pull both of those into one column. And it makes it a little easier to read too, because you're not cramming everything into a small space.
So Tom, I'm not a designer, so my question is more like, so the way I'm trying to understand it, so by resizing the browser, you keep running a different query, and as you query the widths, height, and other attributes of this media, then you can call it different CSS.
Exactly. That's exactly how it works. Something else you could do, take a look. Oh, this is, let me see if I can move this over.
Well, necessarily you don't have to call it a different CSS. I mean, it just can be a rule within that one CSS.
Within the query,
Yeah.
right. But if you, there's other things you can do, like check out these images. As you resize, those are going to change size too.
So it's not a different query for a different CSS style sheet, it could be all in first style sheet.
Yeah. Like take a look at these images. As it changes, you can make the image get bigger or smaller, depending. And when it gets too small, then you can just put everything in one column. And what I did here was I dropped all the sidebars underneath the main content column, so they get out of the way. So now you can just focus on the content. And as you resize it, because it's smaller, you notice the text is bigger. On a handheld, you want to be able to read it, so you can change that too. Pretty cool stuff, though. So let's take a, I'll show you how I did this. Can you read this on the bottom? Let me stop there. All right, let me try to get this over here. Right here, I'm going to highlight one. This is a media query. I'm using all, which means all devices, and the minimum width 768 pixels. So anything over 768 pixels is going to pick up the styles that I have between these curly brackets right here, from here to here. I have another one here where the minimum width 980 pixels. Also got some other cool stuff in here. I'm running that along with orientation landscape. So that would be like an iPad, which have right here. Where'd it go?
Tom, while you're pulling that up, is there anything in particular you have to install or have on your server? Or can you just call a media query
It's
style sheet?
just CSS.
It's built in, okay.
It's just CSS. So here's what it looks like on an iPad. If you flip to portrait, it changes. It goes, it puts everything into one column. And it actually, I moved the logo over to the right side, whereas before it was on the left. So you can do anything with CSS that you can do otherwise, but you can have it react differently depending on the orientation or the size of your screen.
Is it browser limited as far as the app media?
Yes. And we'll talk about that later. There's lots to go over. But as you can see, I've got several of them here. And I do depending on what the width is. And a lot of them are depending on the device, sometimes on the orientation. A lot of these things don't work in different devices. Like I mentioned before, we went to iOS 5, where the iPhone last week did not do orientation for the landscape. This week, iOS 5 does. So it's hard to keep up on this. Hopefully, soon it'll all stabilize. But there's also Android and BlackBerry, and there's a WebOS too. So they're all different, so you have to keep track of that. But the great thing about this is that you can define in a range. So you don't have to devise, whereas you were going to use a dedicated device that's not paying attention to the screen size, you would have, if you wanted to do something for BlackBerry, you'd have to write a separate app for that, separate one for Android, separate one for iOS. The responsive theming allows you to write one that'll work across all the different devices. So you have a lot less maintenance, a lot less upkeep, and it's a lot easier to get going, up and running.
You generated more than by the size of the
Well, you can take account into that account. Like an iPad is 768 by 1024. So you can write specific rules for that. You can also write a minimum device width with 768, and then use the orientation, either portrait or landscape, and change your styles depending on that. And that would target just the iPad. You don't want to get too heavy into that, because then you're going to be ended up writing specific styles for each device. You don't want to do that, but to give you an idea, like the phone, like my Android phone is 480 by 800, whereas my iPhone is 320 by 480. And those are basically the same size in your hand, but they're completely different resolutions. So you want to try to get one that'll do as few as possible, so you don't want to duplicate as much work. But now you can also do it like on the iPhone. Where did that go? When things get too small, like I showed you, the image is resized. Like, I don't know if you can see this, anybody has an iPhone. Here's my article. Compare it to what we have here. I have 7 in this one, and this is a very simple example. You can make it as complex as you want. Yeah. Well, I've seen some sites they tend to use at least 6, sometimes more. I did some things like I have here, you can see it. Let me see if I can get it small enough on here. Like I put the logo on the top here when you're in the handheld range. Also increase the font size to make it a little easier to read. So when you get a little bigger, I put the logo on the right. I didn't have to do that, you know, it's just kind of cool stuff you can do. And I mean, maybe you'd want to do that and then flip it over to the left. They also wrap, so that's why you can use text instead of images, and it would make it that much more clear. But someone mentioned that do this work on IE, and it does not work on any version of Internet Explorer less than 9. What you can do is conditional comments. Now, a desktop site doesn't really need to be responsive. So the way I have this set up, if somebody has Windows, you're going to get 980 pixel wide, and it's not going to have any, you resize it, nothing's going to happen. There are other things you can do. There's a script called respond.js that you can load that will actually make it query, it'll read the media query files and parse them and use JavaScript to send those changes to the browser. The disadvantage to using respond.js is that you can only use min and max width for your features. So if you want to use orientation portrait, it's going to ignore it. Now that might be a good thing, because that way you can hide something from Internet Explorer too if you wanted to do that. So it's right now, as I mentioned, it's in a huge state of flux. The good news is it works in IE9, and IE10 right now has better CSS3 support than a lot of other browsers, including Chrome and Firefox. There's some things that are coming out that are really cool that are only going to be in IE right away. If you have the time and you have resources and you have a Windows machine, download the IE10 platform preview. They have some really cool stuff you can do with media queries, more so than you can do right now. The other browsers will probably catch up, but right now IE10 looks to be the one that's going to be in front for a while. So for what I'm doing here for Internet Explorer is I'm just, I'm going to hit source. I'm just using a regular conditional comment. If it's less than IE9, it just runs a static style sheet that just gives it a static. So they won't be able to resize it if you're using IE8 or less. It won't do that. It'll just be a regular desktop site, which is fine, really, because people sit there and play with their browsers while they're reading there's a lot of good information out there. Like I mentioned before, the media query site is really kind of cool. It's a good drop. I think they're Drupal. And again, if you want to find out, the best place to go is right to the source. W3C has the media queries candidate recommendation. Pretty recent. It has everything you'd want to know about media queries and probably a little more. It's pretty heavy stuff, but this is actually the best place to go to find out about this because it's changing. Like this was just updated in July, and I'm sure it'll be updated again very soon. So like I said, it's in a rapid state of change. So it's good to keep up on this. It's a couple of really good books if you have a chance, and they're both available as ebooks. There's Responsive Web Design. It's by Ethan Marcotte. He's the guy who coined the phrase responsive web design. And another one by Eric Gustafson called Adaptive Web Design, which is really a really techie book. So if you like that kind of book, I would highly recommend it. It's pretty heavy stuff, though. So.
Is it possible to solve JavaScript functions or
No, you can't do it. Not with media queries. If you're, then you would just use like a resize event listener, and a lot of scripts that do that. Like there's one I'm working on that activates when a screen gets to a certain size. It's resource intensive, but if you don't call it too often, it's not going to hurt you that much. The thing you can do, and there's other things, like I mentioned before, this is all CSS, but what I'm going to show you here, these images that I'm using, and this is where you can get into a drawback. I'm going to see if I can get this image to open it up in another browser. This image is actually quite a bit bigger than what I'm showing on the web, or showing on the website, the same image. And that's because I'm resizing it dynamically. As it resizes, the image size changes. So you want to do that. You want to make your images a little bit bigger. How you do this is, you guys know how you would do this, the image thing? You pick an image and then you put it in a container. You give that container a proportional width, like this one is 20% of the width. And then you set the maximum width of the image to 100%. And then as that changes, the image inside it changes as well. Pretty cool. And if it gets too small, like I did here, actually hit it. The disadvantage to this, well, it's going to be a little bit smaller. There. I can't make this small enough, but that image will go away. The problem is you're still loading them into your browser. And if you have a big banner, you can put that in there too. The user's still going to download that if you're just hiding it with display none. So what you may want to do is use a user agent test, detect what there's many of them out there that can detect what the device is, and then exclude those from delivering those images to whatever media query you match. That would help as far as optimization goes. Or you can set up different size images. Like if you have one here that's really small, you can send it out instead of the really big one that you're resizing across all the different browsers. So by itself, media queries and responsive design is not an ideal solution for this, but you can combine this what we're doing before with the user agent using backend technique to serve up different content for the front end and still use the same theme without having to build another site around, which is a huge time saver itself. Any more questions? I need to pick Tom's brain. Somebody. Yeah, that's one way to do it. You can include it in a link tag. I don't like doing it that way because it's like to keep the amount of HTTP requests down to a minimum. And if you put them all in one style sheet, that your server's only pulling one style sheet instead of pulling several like you do to the link tag. But yes, @media is how I prefer to do that. Let me get back to that. It's just,
And so that is in your app?
yes, and I have one right here. Can you see it?
Can you mark it?
Yeah.
Scroll your mouse to the left.
Yeah. You see, I'm going with a min width of 768 and a max width of 979. So the media is all, so you can actually target for a certain range too. You see what I have there? I got a comma. That's how you can get more queries on one line and match different devices and use the same styles. Because I was using orientation here, which doesn't work on every device, so you kind of have to zero in.
What's the difference between min and max width and min and max device width?
The min device width is the actual physical width of your device regardless of what it's been sized to. So whereas min width is whatever I size when I resize something, the min width gets smaller, or that's what changes. Whereas the min device width, regardless of what it's set to, it's going to go to what the actual physical width of the device is. And that's more so with mobile, like down here. Like, can you see this? Let me zoom in on this one. Okay, max width is 320. Min width 321. I'm going over, but here we have min device width 480. So that's for, I'm actually targeting like my Android phone here, which has a minimum device width of 480 pixels and a max width of 800. So that's 480 portrait, 800 landscape. It'll match any phone that has those. If you turn it this way or that way, those styles will go to it.
Okay, if I read this correctly, you have the at media statement at the top. And if it falls within those measurements, then you perform the CSS below it.
Right. Like this one
Yeah.
right here.
Yeah,
All
you
of the
do all that.
CS is going to do right here.
Right. So then why are the next, what happens with the next three statements? There's
Oh,
no
those are
CSS
collapsed.
oh, they're collapsed.
Yeah,
Okay, there
just to
they are.
make them a little easier to see how many I had.
Yeah, I was
So-
looking for the CSS.
There's a lot of CSS there. And it's just regular CSS. The media query itself might look a little different, but everything inside there is just like you would normally do.
And that at media statement is new for CSS3?
CSS3, the at media with the features. I believe you could use at media before, but you couldn't use a device with or anything with it. The query part is the new part.
Do you think you could email us that file?
I'm gonna try to get these up on either our GitHub account or get the files up. But yeah.
That'd be great.
Upload files to the Meetup.
Oh, we can? Okay. Yeah, I can do that.
That's a lot. It's easy to make a mistake with all that syntax.
Yeah, it is. But really, once you get in, trust me, I made plenty doing this. But this is really all you need to worry about. This part right here. The rest, if you're front end, if you do a lot of front end work, the rest is just regular CSS. There's nothing odd about it. It's just you're restricting it to a certain size.
So the general guideline would be to, like, as you're reducing size, width, is to center your logo, increase your font, go down to one column. Is there anything else?
Hide your images. I was working on a script. I didn't have it ready. I wish I could have, but because it was so cool. But I was trying to make the my menu, which is kind of, that's a problem in mobile. But I'm trying to like read that and turn it into a select, so it's an option. So then you could use the iPhones. I couldn't get it to work. Maybe by next time, but it works on the browser. It just didn't work on the phone, which I couldn't figure out. So yeah, but I'm trying to think of another instance other than the columns are definitely a place. Can you think of one, Brent? That they did something other than that? I don't know. You could probably think of something though.
Well, I think that's great.
Yeah.
It's simple to do, really, and
Yeah.
accomplishes a lot.
You said you've done them before, right?
Yeah.
What are you?
I mean, I'm just doing the same thing as you did, but the only thing is I'm not doing fluid layout. I do fixed stuff because I'll have like say different columns and like that, and I'll have like multiple columns, say like say there's like a pretty much using the 960, like you have the different columns and how many bars it is, and
Mhm.
so like you kind of align yourself to that, and using and I was trying, I don't know, 'cause maybe I'm still kind of new to it, but like having the spaces between the different columns, I was trying to keep that with the fluid layout is kind of tough, so I have to do it fixed, so I can say like this is um, how many pixels are between each columns, because once you do percentages, it's all becoming
Well, yeah,
skewed.
and that's why you should probably get away from pixels, because I've been using, when we got to this whole wide aspect ratio, everybody started using pixels, and everybody before that I was doing, I would use pixels to define my width of my page, but I would use all my fonts and my margin padding would all be done in EM. And about 5 years ago, when we started going with the 960s and the blueprints and all the frameworks that were very rigid, they all started including style sheets for the typography that were done in pixels. And because at that time, browsers had all come up with a decent way to zoom. So, and that at the time was, well, there's no reason to use EM anymore because browsers zoom now. But as we're going back to this, when I did this, there's no pixels in here other than in the media queries. That's the only time I use pixels. Everything else is either done in percentages or EM. It just makes it a lot easier to work with if you do that, because pixels and fluid just don't match, especially when it comes to type.
I think just from a business perspective, and I work more on the project management side, biz dev side of things, and then speaking with clients, the ability to add media queries to just CSS and then integrate that with the content management platform. And when you bring that up to a client and they say, wait, I can have, my content and everything displayed on multiple devices, but I can update it in one area instead of having to update it in multiple places with multiple logons. I mean, it's really invaluable to a client. They really bite off on that type of thing. So for us doing mobile now, it's pretty amazing how many clients just are blown away when you show them a screen and make it smaller and everything starts to move around. It's from that perspective, it's extremely cool and valuable. Yeah, it really is. Thanks, Tom.
Anybody else?
Awesome.
Oh, thanks.
What do we talk about now?
Well, it's 7:10. The Rangers start playing here pretty soon. So if you guys want to roll early or don't care, we can hang around and drink some alcohol and just talk shop a little bit. One thing I didn't know if you guys were aware of, but there's a big design week coming up. Eventbrite is actually promoting it, and so I thought that I'd promote it and let you know about it. It's November the 14th through the 18th in Addison, and day 1 is going to be talking about design concepts and prototyping. Day 2 is talking about content strategy. Day 3 is usability boot camp.